Small towns, woods, and people going missing. Has there ever been a better winning combination in the history of this planet with humanity on it? The answer is no. This is that good stuff, as they say. In the events of Werewolves Within, a small town of leftovers due to people evidently leaving the area during the winter, like this isn't like 30 Days of Night, this is like the Appalachian Mountains, I think. You're really not in that dangerous of an area for snow. Granted, there is only one road that actually leaves out of this town. Anyhow, this random amalgamation of people would end up facing off against a creature capable of tearing through solid metal, but still maintaining the intelligence to know exactly where to attack to cripple human infrastructure, which denotes something rather interesting about the functionality of its brain. As the town struggles to figure out who is the creature, they would ultimately start dropping like flies. But the question is, what is this individual actually afflicted with? How is this any different from your run-of-the-mill lycanthropy, and how might their brains still be operating? Let's discuss that and more in today's episode over the Werewolves Within. And there is no shot you already know what the creature is. How could you with a title like that? We kick off with the opening title screen of Listening is Where Love Begins, listening to ourselves and then our neighbors. Why it's written over horror music and stingers is beyond me. This is pretty much hilarious. Also, Mr. Rogers legitimately said this, so it's gonna be one of those movies. A song about screwing with teachers starts playing, and not the good kind of screwing with teachers as like a 32-year-old talking to a teacher at a salsa event. You get it. Basically, this song is just talking about putting thumbtacks in chairs. Panning over to my dream house, a man is in the woods and he's texting someone. Popping off the wedding ring, hey, it happens. Twigs and branches begin rustling near him, scaring the absolute crap out of him as something is incredibly quick. See, it's around that point that you start heading inside of the building, not looking for it. Calling out hello, nothing answers, predictably. That is the typical response for, something to do when it's hunting you. He moves further into the woods, which is always a great plan, like bro, go get the force multiplier. He then gets grabbed and dragged before getting sliced and diced, and then completely just dragged off to his doom. Jumping over to another man, 29.5 days later, all traffic passes him on the side of the road. Pretty sure I would have seen my car in that line because I cannot stand when people drive slow on 2-lane roads. Screaming in the car like a madman, very cathartic. He calls Charlotte, telling her that he's almost to his new post. Seemed like a bit of a pushover type of deal, but pulling up to my dream house once more, this is evidently where he will be staying in his time in Beaverfield. Also, YouTube is YouTubing lately, so if y'all enjoy this content, please feel free to like, as it helps the channel immensely, and I love you. Moving on! Walking inside, we hear a news story about a storm rolling in as Lily from AT&T points him towards the front desk. At least I'm pretty sure that's who that is. Kinda looks like her. You know what, who am I kidding? I know that's her. A man is trying to make a sale to the owner, talking about the impact studies and whatnot, and I'm assuming they're looking for gas in the area. Finn Wheeler is there as the new park ranger. He begins talking to him about the pipeline and how he's going to be there for the duration of its construction. Headed to his room, the owner is then carrying his stuff, complete alpha chat, and yes, I did know it, that is Lily from AT&T. That's pretty much my celebrity crush in this movie. Nice. She's the mail woman who then hands Finn his mail, informing him of local trapping, and the guy doing it is a complete weirdo. He's put on the case almost immediately and then is ready to head out to start his investigation. Telling Finn, the hot goss of the town, she informs him of Janine's husband having run away with another woman. It happens. At least that was the guy at the beginning. And he really didn't run off so much as he was drug off. And heading into town, they then check out the businesses, stopping off at a yoga studio before closing the curtains on them, as they now meet the mechanic as well as Marcus. And yo, is that T100 in the background? Actually, hilariously, did you know Ford got upset at Toyota for making the T100s, but then got really mad at Toyota when they plan on making a T150 and ended up engaging in a lawsuit, which is where we now get the Toyota Tacoma, because they did have to change it because it was too close. You see, Ford was concerned that Toyota may have been replicating the experience which Ford was known for, minus the breaking down all the time, that is. But anyhow, absolutely cherry vehicle, even with the rust. Of course, you would obviously need to go with a 3.4 liter V6, which would give you around 190 horsepower, which actually would put out about 25 miles per gallon on the highway, which ain't bad for Toyota. My 4Runner only gets around 17. Of course, it's lifted and has larger tires, but man, the old Toyotas are unkillable beasts. Alright, enough fangirling, it's time to fangirl over Lily. Meeting the next woman, Trish, she owns a farm down the road, pulling out a ranger angel, that she made for Finn. Evidently, the whole town is getting paid for the pipeline being there, and everyone is pretty jazzed about it. They meet up with the next creepy dude, who then hands them some maple syrup. His name is Pete, and he's into Lily. Cannot actually blame him for that, and I'm not gonna call her by her actual name in the movie, which is Cicely or Cecilia or something like that. I'm just gonna keep calling her Lily. Continuing their walk, they then move across a very suggestive phallic fire totem. Remember, if it's burning like that, go see a doctor. Which also, fun fact, we were beginning to have issues curing gonorrhea due to it becoming antibiotic resistant. Wear a jacket when you're hooking up with someone new. You don't want to be patient zero that has that new strain. So as they keep walking, the snow starts falling, which is absolutely idyllic, as they head up the rail trail, which is an interesting name for it. But Lily breaks off at this point, not wanting to go any further. Missing the sign, he kind of keeps walking while talking on the phone, continuing to miss every sign possible that he will have his organs introduced to open atmosphere. He approaches the creepy cabin, calling out to Flint. Knocking on the door, like a cop, all the windows are covered in fabric, which is a little odd. Looking inside, he sees a wolf head as a man appears on the porch. What is this dude in, like 10,000 BC? Finn gets told to leave even though he's a ranger, as he tells them, you know what, as long as you're not on federal land, it's all good. Finn comes running down the driveway after that wonderful encounter as Lily asks if he's hungry. She says that she tried to warn him though. Right. Heading into what I can only assume is a barcade, Lily then runs in the back to find food. Lily comes back out as they start playing like that song's like, I saw the sign. Anyways, I can't sing, but actually, believe it or not, that's the song that played the first time I developed my celebrity crush. It's a real problem. So they have a beer. I think it's kombucha. It is actually. So Finn mentions his girlfriend Charlotte and how she sent him out there because he's too available. Yes, of course. That's the harbinger being single. He says technically they didn't break up, but they aren't actually really together either. Like they aren't talking or seeing one another. Then Finn slowly realizes that she broke up with him at this point. Nice job, bro. So they do something violent and then start throwing axes. Finn turns out to be a natural, so despite Finn actually being a bit of a pushover, things are going well with Lily. What a Chad. That is until Finn gets a call from his ex-girlfriend and stops mid-kiss. My brother in Christ, why? So Lily walks out, fumble of the century. So later that night, as night falls, the storm actually did show up, and it's pretty bad, cutting power to kind of like the whole town. What could possibly go wrong? So as Trish walks around her house, she gets her quadruped to let it go outside to use the bathroom as she starts smoking inside, which is a beta move of the highest order, although this would technically save her life. As the dog pees, footsteps approach before Trish hears her dog getting totally got. She grabs a leash as it snaps as something has chewed through it. Grabbing a flashlight and not a force multiplier for some reason, she then shines it at the door as something is outside. She opens the blinds before screaming. The next morning, Finn gets up, hearing yelling, and then runs downstairs to find Trish. She said a monster ate her dog. The company man back there says it's probably just a coyote, but they ask the doctor what she thinks of it. Dr. Ellis is there to, I guess, stop the pipeline, which is a bit odd, as she's supposed to be on the environmental side of science, but as we will find out, she can also run genetic searches for compatibility. Do all scientists know everything? Yes. Lily then shows up to tell them that the power is out everywhere. Dr. Ellis then grabs a hair from the leash as the mechanic crackhead couple show up, saying the storm is totally screwed. Now, they didn't say screwed, but you get it. Only I didn't say fudge. Finn then now heads outside and sees an avalanche has blocked the only road out of town, and walking down the streets, there are really only like 8 people that live here. He finds evidence of some of the infrastructure has been actually sabotaged. And I know what these are called, but for the life of me, I cannot remember its name. Essentially, just a ton of juice runs through these things, and we used to like sit on them and hang out with friends for hours as younglings. It's absolutely wild. Like these evidently ever arced, it'd be a really bad time. Also, I think some of these are generators as well. But we see the first evidence that this creature is incredibly powerful. Now, if you haven't noticed already, this video is going to be based on like the old format of videos that I used to make, mainly because of how the movie itself is structured. But to pierce through metal like that with just claws, or at least it's assumed just claws, this would require a ridiculous amount of strength. Back at the manch, as Lily calls it, Finn then walks around the building, finding several claw marks all over, saying heavens to Betsy several times. So as he's heavening to Betsying, he begins to hear growling coming from underneath the building and then finds a bracelet. Pulling it, an arm then comes out. Finn then heads inside, telling everyone that the roads are totally screwed. The generators are also shot, like all the generators in town, which just inspires an argument amongst the neighbors as Finn then turns to Janine and is like, oh, by the way, you have a body underneath your porch. It's your ex-husband, as then she lets out a yell. Guess he didn't make it to Belize after all. Company man says it must have been a wolf that took him out. The leg muscles were severed to immobilize him. Dr. Ellis then takes another hair sample and puts it in a vial for later. She leaves to compare these first samples. So they all head back inside as they talk about how they could really use a snowplow right now if only the starter and fuel injector that Gwen had ordered earlier had actually been delivered. The mechanic couple wonders if Janine is going to kill somebody next. Finn then says that they should go up to the trapper's cottage and see that if there's any possibility that he would actually go trap this animal for them, but nobody will go with him except Lily. So when you almost make out with a woman, by the way, just for your own information, and then stop to answer your ex-girlfriend, typically they're not too happy about it. Remember that, just some unsolicited advice from Papa Roanoke. And predictably, neither is Lily about the whole situation. Finn apologizes because he totally blew it, as Lily tells him to man up, grow a beard, get some chest hair, listen to freeform jazz, and learn about tax extensions. You know, the things that make us all men. Back at the manch, Trish is totally zoned out crocheting. Dr. Ellis is up in her office as Janine comes to bring her a drink. Dr. Ellis says she's gonna go find out what took out her husband, as then she goes for a hug and then just gets totally ignored, which is a classic scientist move. They're really bad at social interactions, mainly because that's me. Back over at the trapper's cabin, Finn is afraid to knock on the door, but eventually the trapper just comes to the door because they're being so loud and he's covered in blood. He asks what happened to his generator as they inform him of the situation. Basically, they need him to track down this thing and take it out. So he thinks about it for like half a second and then declines. Classic. Finn then appeals to him being like a part of this town and you're the community and it's taking people out. And he's like, well, the townspeople also voted for you to get rid of this beast. Finn asks him to be a good neighbor just like Mr. Rogers. What? As Flint doesn't know who Mr. Rogers is either, this movie is ridiculous. Trish at this point then starts having a mental breakdown, and as they talk about what took out the generators, the mechanic guy yells out it was a werewolf, which that's the smart guy. But the town assumes it was just Flint. So back over at Flint's cabin, they find the dog collar on the mantle as Flint says he's not their man, as Finn and Lily at this point are like, oh yeah, no, totally dude, it's totally good, because they realize he took out the dog. Flint asks if they want to leave because they start panicking near the door as he finally unlocks it for them so they can get out of there. Very smooth. Entering the manch, Lily says Flint killed the dog. Janine then questions if he took out her husband too. So things are looking pretty bad for Flint currently. So as Janine then comes to terms with the slaying of her husband, Dr. Ellis comes in to talk to her. She compared both the samples that were from Dave's body and Chachi's outfit, and she says the hair is canine, but there are no matches in the database, and she isn't sure what it is. Meanwhile, Gwen looks at a picture and is like, well, that looks weird, as Dr. Ellis says Dave was probably eaten alive by whatever it was, which is exactly what Janine needs to hear right now. Flint at this point says everyone should stay there for the night, as they all agree, as definitely the move. Finn asks, is anybody packing, as the whole town basically is. The patriotism in me is just violently rising. So Mechanic Man says if Flint comes down, he's gonna take him out. Pete makes a pass at Lily as per usual, and then they all pretty much agree that they need a handheld in every room, so doubling up is probably necessary. Heading to Dr. Ellis's room, they then knock on her door, but she doesn't answer. She's working on something in a very suspicious manner. Locking down the manch, it's a full moon tonight. As everyone then heads to bed, Finn is passed out on the couch while something moves in the stairwell. In Trish and Pete's room, the door opens as Pete is grabbed and dragged out of the room and down the hallway. Gwen fires a few shots as Pete's hand is then bitten off. That must hurt. Finn then yells out it was an animal attack as they realize Pete was also shot near the heart too. Possibly the heart, maybe, I don't know, probably it's just a lung hit, but Dr. Ellis then takes a picture of him and definitely a top lung shot actually, probably not the heart. The hair from earlier was found on him as well, and now she takes that drink from the company man. Dr. Ellison heads back to her room and takes a drink, finding blood on her own hand. Marcus looks at the pills on the table, totally spazzing out a bit, as they realize that they can't leave the manch. Trish asks how the animal got in and how did it really get out. Dr. Ellis then checks her laptop as the DNA results have come back inconclusive. So, not really ideal. Grabbing her own handheld, she then looks out the window and sees that the body is now gone. Finn then heads up to Dr. Ellis's room again as shots come out through the door. She threatens the group to stay away from her door, and she says the creature that was inside didn't disappear. She says it's not Flint, it's one of them. Finn then says they don't understand as she responds she can't come out, it could be any one of them, a lycanthrope. Company man then breaks into the room as 2 shots ring out and nobody answers. Company man then opens the door saying she took herself out. That's not sus at all. How exactly did she fire 2 shots if she took herself out? So now it becomes trying to figure out who the werewolf is. Marcus starts talking about his old man used to tell him stories about how they used to run werewolves out of the woods, and Gwen randomly brings up how her dad used to kick her ass, as everyone kind of just like looks at her like, okay, well, how's that relevant? Very empathetic group here. She continues explaining, well, he also used to tell me a Wendigo would come for me and get me. At least that's what her old man would say. Trish says like someone is trying to just scare them, so it becomes a standoff at this point over the money that is supposed to be paid to them, as nobody trusts anyone because money over werewolves, you know? So Finn says that they should lock away the force multipliers until they figure this out. But who's the werewolf? Find out in the next episode of Dragon Ball, or actually right now. So they wrap up the handhelds and then put them away, locking the door before throwing the keys out the window. Little overzealous. Like, what if you need those, right? So Marcus pipes up first, accusing Trish. All the goss in the town now starts coming out. So while they argue, Pete starts laughing, saying he's not a creep. He says that he's the werewolf. Everyone kind of looks a little freaked out now as he starts accusing everyone else of being the werewolf. Maybe Pete ate his own hand. Seems like something Pete might do. So Janine then brings up how the company man may have taken out Dr. Ellis. Lily has a breakdown as well now, as they start to turn on Company Man as Finn finally uses his outside voice after breaking a coffee cup and tells them to take a breath and calm down. Finn calms them using the "we are the community" method, as Gwen says, yeah, screw that, and her and Marcus go to leave. Company Man agrees to leave at this point as well, as the other two, Devon and Joachim, also leave now because they're like, screw this. Trish and Pete abandon ship next, leaving just Lily, Finn, and Janine, as she says they'll get what's coming to them, also a little sus. Finn now begins boarding up the windows as Lily hugs him, and just like that, you're back in. Meanwhile, Company Man outside is evidently a Helsing or something, and over at Trish and Pete's, Trish gets up, looking out the window, obsessed with the loss of her dog. So back at the manch, Finn then hears a scream and runs upstairs to check out what that was. Lily comes out of the door, scaring him, along with Janine next, as they say there's something in Parker's room. They thought he left earlier, but evidently not. Entering the room, the window is open. As Finn goes to close it though, Lily sees a paper clipping on the floor. Turning it over, it's about a mauling in the area. Finn then opens a desk drawer, finding a silver blade, as Lily asks if he was at that town in the paper. Devon and Joachim continue their walk, having not made it home yet. Somehow, Trish and Pete beat them, as they are then blinded by the light. Finn asks what the blade smells like as Lily takes it. Is chloroform? No, it's diesel. So the generators obviously must have been slashed to some capacity with this. Devon and Joachim are not having a good time as lights continue to appear around them. Finding a map, Company Man was tracking attacks before Devon then gets hit by Trish. She then stabs Devon in the neck at this point, and I'm not really sure why. Company Man then has re-entered the building looking for the werewolf. Finn and Lily go to get around him, alerting him to their presence almost immediately. Heading outside, he calls out to them, telling them that he's just hunting the werewolf. Joachim then turns on a flashlight from underneath the deck, saying that he got separated from Devon. He tells them it was by Trish's house. So heading over, they then call out for Devon as Joachim opens the door and finds Marcus wearing Freddy Krueger hands, stealing Trish's pills. Marcus then flees the residence as he's immediately run over by Gwen, who's then domed by Trish. Good lord, this town is literally eating itself at this point. So they leave Trish outside as she goes the other way in, stopping them before they can leave. She then pushes them towards the living room. Joachim then asks if she did something to her husband, as Trish looks over at Peter and realizes he's about done. Joachim then hits Trish across the face, ending her pretty much immediately, as then her face falls into the actual furnace. Man, this town is like down to 50% population now. Down the street, the company man then stands in the road. They don't know if he's a werewolf, as Joachim then takes Lily hostage. He says it's the seventh born and that she must be the werewolf. Some sort of Argentinian belief. Finn tries to calm him down at this point, as Finn then takes an arrow across the arm that kind of like winces him, I guess, as then it flies into Joachim's xiphoid process. Ouchies. Also, liver for sure got hit by that bolt. Company man then approaches reloading as Lily tries to start the truck. Company man then gets to the truck, grabbing Lily. He pulls her out and then starts calling out about all the maulings and manglings, all at the same time that Finn arrived at this town. He thinks all of this was the Ranger. He says he found the knife in the Ranger's room, but the Ranger's confused as he says, no, we found that in your room. Finn then says that there is no monster, but CM insists that Finn is actually the monster. Lily then hits CM in the legs as Finn starts knocking him in the face before getting stabbed in the side. He maces CM in the face almost immediately, though it just wears off, not really sure how that works, as Joachim is back up. He's able to take out the gas behind him, causing a massive explosion, taking out CM, but somehow not Finn and Lily in the process. Having survived, the power then turns back on as Finn looks at his wound. Ouchies. Lily grabs him as Finn says, oh, I'm probably dying. Like, the key here is to pack the wound. Lily says, no, I like you, you can't die, as he lays there. At least it's just internal bleeding, right? I mean, that's where blood's supposed to be. Back at the barcade, Finn is back up in action walking around the area. Finding the packages from earlier, she really has been keeping mail to prevent them from leaving. Like it was a joke he made at the beginning, but it appears that that's actually what's been happening. So as he looks through news clippings, it all has to do with the maulings and manglings in the area. David Sherman, the Manch guy's phone then goes off as he was the original mail carrier. Heading back out of the room, he then turns and finds Lily standing there. He accuses her of being the werewolf as her bones begin to crack. He asks if she was actually even really in a punk band. She says, we didn't break up, I just ate all of them. Finn then said, well, you seemed great, but she was manipulating him the whole time. She then howls because on all levels except physical, she's a wolf, and she tells him that werewolves are real, but getting turned on by Finn's Yellowstone stories were a fantasy. Man, that is brutal. Lily then says that she needed Sherman's uniform, and Pete got his hand eaten because he kept trying to guide her by her lower back and she just didn't like it. Yeesh. So as she keeps talking, her nails begin changing as Lily says Finn is pathological, accusing him of being the real monster. He's too nice. Finn then calls her a monster, as he says the whole time she was mocking him for being nice. He launches into how being nice can be a good thing. I mean, it can be. As Lily says, well, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and I mean, technically, you could be nice, or you could be a werewolf. As then she begins fully changing. And I promise you, now that she's actually turned, we are going to get to the science here momentarily, and if you click off, I will hunt you down, and I swear. As she turns, Flint then shows up to be a good neighbor, like Mr. Rogers, and knocks her out with a shovel. Before then, he gets bitten by Lily. He then stabs her in the hand before being thrown around like a baby in a dryer. Finn then runs and hides as Lily starts looking for him. Heading towards the axes, silver might work for close encounters, but if you could take them back to factory pre-assembly, it'll be hard for them to attack. Basically the concept of a wood chipper beating everything. Throwing axes at her, she then dodges everything before he kicks her in the face and then hits her with a snowshoe. Also, if you didn't know, he's been mentioning how much he likes snowshoes the whole time. Having taken out the werewolf, he's pretty jazzed about it. Flint survived his attack, and as they both go to get out of there, they stop to talk because of course they do, and in the background, Lily starts to get back up. Really, that was your chance to double tap. She's back in her human form for a moment, it looks like, as they say they should go to Janine's for a sandwich. And then she goes to jump on them to take them both out, but a bolt strikes her as they turn to see Janine having saved them. And thus concludes Werewolves Within. So first things first, we need to highlight several different variations between this werewolf and the ones that typically exist in folklore, because there are some stark contrasts between the two, which seem to put this kind of in a strange realm of questioning if this is actually lycanthropy or not. The first thing we need to know about werewolves is that the concept is actually related into reality. All throughout human history, mental illnesses have existed and we have attempted to explain them, and typically what we will do is by attributing it to the supernatural in the absence of evidence that we can find. I mean, nowadays, we're a lot better at figuring out what the cause is, but it used to just be like, well, it must be ghosts. So the whole ability likely stems from a survival mechanism housed deep within our brains during our evolutionary past. Should Ooga Dooga not come back from the hunt, and he was heading to an area where many others would go missing without a trace, in order to prevent others, or even ourselves, from befalling the same fate, stories would be made up in order to highlight just how dangerous that area is. This would likely keep at least some alive, who would then be able to pass on the information to help others survive. With mental illnesses and physiological deformities, it was no different. The idea of lycanthropy began to emerge quite some time ago, with different cultures calling it different things. But it was essentially a self-reported feeling more often than not. And this would be of the person kind of feeling like an animal, or at least changing into one. In some cultures, this would be acknowledged as like skinwalkers or shapeshifters. In European cultures, it was known as turning into a werewolf or lycanthropy. But this illness has a very real neurological origin, and it goes back to how the body perceives itself. So think about it for a second. Actually, you know what? Do something. Like, I want you to do something. Close your eyes and hold out your hands. Now, with keeping your eyes closed, try to touch two fingers together on opposite hands. It's pretty easy to do, right? Gotta think about it. How did you actually do that without looking at your fingers and knowing where they were relative to the space in front of you? You can thank the neurons associated with this because they are known as like a sense of proprioception. This is also known as kinesthesia, but it's your body's ability to sense movement, action, and location without actually looking at your body's positioning. While this may seem pretty run-of-the-mill and kind of mundane, it's only without it that you begin to see how critical it is for just everyday things. In fact, there was a man, I forget the name, but essentially he contracted a virus that specifically attacked his proprioception neurons. He could still move, he could still feel everything, and for all intents and purposes, he was otherwise unaffected. But once the virus cleared, it became apparent that he could not sense the location of his body. For the rest of his life, he has to now look and coordinate mentally, like using conscious effort, I guess is the best way to put it, to move his body. And even then, the force he uses in order to do everyday tasks like putting his hand on a desk or opening a door is higher than normal and much less refined, all because his brain is no longer able to sense where he is in relation to objects, which also means he can run into things rather easily. This highlights a system within the body that, while we do not think of it all that often, has profound impacts on the quality of life. This constant inflow of information communicating with the brain serves other purposes as well. It grounds the mind, which in turn likely also makes people feel connected to their environment and their own bodies, which is also kind of one of the thought experiments is if we were to take just a human brain and keep it alive, but it had no sensory connections, no sight, no hearing, no feeling, no nothing, would that brain just completely descend into absolute chaos? I think it would, because it wouldn't have enough information on what's around it, and it would basically just, I think, go absolutely stir crazy. But this is why when the body is having difficulty connecting with this system in particular, a person can start to feel like suddenly they are no longer human. It is known that those who feel like they are dying, for instance, or turning into another animal, or feel like they are already a walking corpse, such as with Cotard syndrome, appear to have issues with their proprioception neurons. An understanding of this issue can come from outside of the body, like contracting a virus, for instance. You can begin to see where the idea began within our species that shapeshifting was even possible to begin with because it was self-reported. So from here, all these standard connections would be made for a werewolf existing. First, that it must be taken out with pure silver. I did a discussion on this concerning toxicity of silver to werewolves in, I think, my Dog Soldiers episode, but let's touch on it here in case you haven't seen it, because it's been a hot minute ago. Silver, while handling it, it's not very toxic. If you get stabbed by it, typically you will have other issues because you're human, like blood loss, for instance. However, werewolves, as we all know, heal incredibly fast. This healing ability is why things like lead puncturing a hole in them or a standard stab wound from steel is able to be repaired. In fact, before getting to silver toxicity, let's discuss that for a moment. Once being injured, several pathways are activated much more quickly in a werewolf. Immediate inflammation is initiated in the response to the opening itself, but rather than like the 6 days, which is standard in terms of humans to heal, new genes imparted by contracting lycanthropy would cause cell division in response to wounds that it would just basically take place in minutes. This rapid response and clotting factor would prevent a werewolf from succumbing to its injuries that typically would happen with humans. However, there appears to be other parameters associated with this. So let's take a step back because it highlights some of the issue with the werewolves within that other werewolves appear to not really display. First, lycanthropy can be contracted through bites. This would indicate that it is in fact a communicable disease of sorts, highly likely again to be a virus, which is interesting given that viruses can actually affect the proprioception neurons. It's just kind of like a happy little accident, or maybe coincidence, or maybe it's entirely connected, whichever you prefer. This virus would likely be a virus that is transcribing into the DNA of a person, imparting genes that would affect several areas, at least in terms of standard lycanthropy. In terms of cell division, which is what we were talking about currently, this would affect probably like the cyclin A, cyclin B, cyclin B2, CDC2 genes, amongst many others. These gene loci would be specifically affected, seeing as there is a need for faster mitosis. But I can hear you asking, why faster mitosis? It seems to me that the healing factor of werewolves, at least in lore, is actually more due to the fact that they need to rapidly transform during a full moon. Because of this, new cells would need to be created in order to do things like rapidly grow, like nails and teeth, hair would increase all over the body, and new bone structures would form underneath the skin. You can also assume muscle mass is increased, indicating new muscle strand growth within the body itself. Essentially, you almost need to become double a person in terms of available biomass, meaning you need new cells. The healing factor is just naturally a result of growth, again, at least for standard lycanthropy. But then you have to ask yourself, why is it only some of the time that these genes are active? It's important to understand that your genes actually are affected by cycles. Clock genes, as they are known, oscillate in the diencephalon and pituitary gland of the brain and appear to link up with the lunar cycle. In fact, if you have ever wondered where the concept of people acting strangely during a full moon has come from, there is a real biological indicator that shows that this isn't just some anecdotal thing that you see. There are biochemical reactions taking place that could alter behavior, and I believe the same can be said for werewolves. Again, with lycanthropy, these creatures are said to hunt by a full moon. But why? I would imagine it's a two-pronged reason. First, while being a werewolf hypothetically affords the creature better night vision, a full moon would flood the area with enough light, allowing for the creature to hunt more effectively and see better than humans can, but probably not as well as wolves can. Along with this, the hypothetical transfer of genes due to the virus infecting a person once they are bitten would clearly be affected by these clock genes and the oscillation of the lunar cycle. And this is why you can take out a werewolf in its human form with standard damage. The genes are fundamentally dormant for the most part, as clock genes are not activating them. However, during the full moon, it takes specifically silver, which then rounds us back to that original point. Why does silver work? Silver, specifically when introduced into the body in enough quantities, like a knife, blocks cells' ability to enter mitosis, interrupting the process by binding to the DNA of the cell. This prevents the healing factor from being able to take place, allowing for a wound to exist like it would on any other regular human. Once the wound is open, the circulatory system would also not as effectively clot, as it's been shown that nanosilver injected into mice reduced the ability of platelets to clump by as much as 40%, and this would allow for a bleed out to happen. Along with this, the silver in the immediate area would contaminate cells close to the wound, blocking the aforementioned mitosis. And this would allow effectively for this small area of the body to become human once more and allow for a werewolf to bleed out as a person would in their human form. But with all that said, this is just your standard lycanthropy, and this is how it is supposed to work, which we see several issues with the movie itself that seems to designate this as a different illness. First, from what we can tell, while it's never really revealed exactly how Lily became a werewolf, what is known is she did not appear to have it her whole life, so it's not just genes that were within her. Initially, she was in a punk rock band where she would then eat her bandmates after contracting lycanthropy, or at least this version of it. And this would mean, once again, it's communicable, and that she had to come into contact with someone or something that had it prior. Of course, here's where the issues arise. While she was able to contract this illness, she doesn't seem to be able to pass it along to others. After biting Pete's hand off, he still succumbed to his wounds and was in no way, shape, or form changing. After Flint gets bitten, there's no indication that he will turn either. And this would indicate that biting is not the vector for the transmission of this virus, ruling saliva out as far as how it's going to spread. And I would still maintain that it is still a virus. Seeing as this is the case, it would seem to imply that the virus is spread either through direct contact with blood entering an open wound on the body of the non-infected person, or potentially one of their mucosa membranes, or the virus is spread via other bodily fluids. And I think we all know what that means, but honestly, that seems the most plausible given that Lily was in a punk rock band, and we all know the propensity of A, humans to hook up with one another, 2, have you ever heard of what rock stars actually do in their free time, and D, I mean, who doesn't enjoy, fun stuff? So bodily fluids are getting passed around like cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving, and not to mention the lore surrounding lycanthropy in general is that there is an increased display of preferable traits associated with reproduction, whether it be changes to muscle mass in the human form or increased confidence. Like, it's a real thing. It's honestly bizarre someone took the time to categorize that knowledge, and now I'm here telling you as well. Like, that takes up space in your brain now. So I would still maintain, however, that this particular virus is most definitely implanting into the DNA of Lily, which now we get into the differences concerning this specific brand of lycanthropy. First thing to realize is that under normal circumstances, human cognitive function is supposed to decrease by quite a bit. More intelligent than your standard wolf, but definitely not as high thinking as a human. Interestingly, Lily seems to maintain her ability to think and act rationally for the most part. However, aggression is most definitely increased as she's no longer seeing herself as a part of the Homo sapiens race and instead is now just viewing humanity as food. This does indicate that some areas of the brain, like the amygdala for instance, are likely overstimulated once transformed, whereas the hypothalamus concerning disgust and also the frontal lobe associated with memory of others and moral choices may be in a depressed state, allowing for a perfect storm of eating someone you were just friends with. Physically, Lily also has some issues that makes her sort of like a werewolf light version. More resilient and stronger than human, but definitely not as powerful as the werewolves are in the lore that humanity has. While the claws are able to slice people apart, it is alleged someone used a knife on the generator, and if that is true, then her claws are not as powerful as they should be to tear through metal, but she is strong enough to send a knife through metal several times. This puts her stronger than a typical human. However, Finn is able to hold her off momentarily during the fight before sending a broken snowshoe through her neck, stunning her. What knocked her down is likely the fact that he may have clipped the spinal cord, which in turn would take longer to heal if in fact that is what's happening. But I am not so sure if the spinal cord was hit or not. It appears it was likely missed. It just stunned her, but this doesn't indicate her healing factor is actually stronger than humans, just nothing vital was actually hit. In fact, when she gets back up after the stun wears off, she is kind of shocked and her coordination is off quite a bit. But I think the biggest issue, however, is the bolt that ends up hitting her in the chest. This is not indicated to be silver, and because of this, the bolt working on her only really means that she can actually be taken out by normal means if enough damage is imparted. And this would either mean that she has been infected with like a sub-lycanthropy version, or the lore humans have on these things is wrong in general and they are more easily taken out than we thought. But with that said, the healing factor may not be affected with specifically the genes associated with mitosis. However, there are many areas of the body that appear to take on new structures, which does indicate there is cellular growth. The skeletal system, for instance, would have to change due to the increased presence of muscle, and this muscle would pull with more force in the bones, meaning denser bones would be needed to resist the force, because otherwise, Lily would probably break every bone just by moving. The cheekbones and brow ridge also appear to change, altering the facial shape, and the teeth are no different, and the hair continues to appear all over. The leg structuring allegedly also changes, but it happens so fast that we really don't see it. The feet elongate as well as she begins walking on the balls of her feet rather than flat-footed in her human form. The skin also changes to a degree, with the cartilage in the ears rising to a point rather than the standard rounded human forms. All these changes would indicate that specific areas do in fact divide rapidly, but in terms of responding to a wound specifically, this particular pathway does not appear affected to me. But then there's also the glaring issue being that with her being a full-on werewolf, this process is described as apparently forcible. You do not have a choice once infected, and every full moon you will devolve into an animal and then turn on those around you. However, with Lily, it appears to be more choice-based. The entire time she is with the group, it is night and the full moon is out. And this means it really is based on if she wants to become a werewolf and not just hulk out on people inadvertently. So really, Lily is actually just a turbo douche with an illness that seems to be completely at her own will if she's tearing people apart or not. So what do I think Lily actually is? It's clear she is infected with a retrovirus of sorts that has transcribed specific dormant genes into her DNA. These genes appear to only be activated by the full moon due to the clock genes that run concurrently with the lunar cycle, pulling influence from the diencephalon and pituitary gland. There is no indication that she can heal herself more than anyone else, and the shot to the neck was pure bad luck on Finn's part, but the bolt to the chest did take her out. After the virus was transferred to her body by a bodily fluid exchange in whatever way that happened, the impact on her body would then lead to an increase in strength and potentially division of cells, given changes to the bone structuring and the face and hair growth on the body. But for all intents and purposes, this appears to be a different form of lycanthropy that she can not only control, but can still maintain her ability to think even when in a transformed state. All in all though, this version of a werewolf would be incredibly easy to take out, as evidently just a shot to the brain, a shell to the face hard enough, or even a wood chipper appear to all be viable options when fighting this creature. But I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think she's a full-on werewolf? My stance is no. This is clearly a differing version from the established lore, which in turn makes sense that she has to be more careful about interacting with humans, given that they can definitely take her out or she could be injured by them. But I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, and subscribing is also awesome, as allegedly you'll be notified every once in a while of when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thank you, sir. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanation of B-Grade Horror Movies, Dakota23, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, and Trash Panda in a Trench Coat. Thank you guys, and to the rest of my patrons, I appreciate y'all's support as well. It has been very helpful, especially as of late. It goes a long way towards keeping everything running. You guys are a bunch of cool cats. All right, so that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.